Our first guest today is a native of Marlborough. Now known across the nation as one of the most insightful political reporters around, he is Chris Cillizza of the Washington Post, author of the very successful political blog, The Fix. It's a must-read for politicos. And Chris, it's a pleasure to have you in here today.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome. Geez, I'll come back more often.
And we have a surprise for you. We dug up a picture. Your high school graduation, but we have to have these.
Sure,
you know what it is, and here it is from Loomis Chafee class of 1994. You haven't changed a bit.
Wow, those sideburns, are those still in? I think 90210 was big back then, so yeah. I think I look very hip.
The Luke Perry look.
Yes.
So tell us, first of all, how did you go from Loomis Chafee, growing up in Marlborough, to being, where you are today?
It's funny, I was not at all interested in politics. And I work with lots of people who spent from womb until today sort of fascinated by the game of politics. I was not. I grew up wanting to be a sports reporter. I liked journalism, but I was not at all interested in politics. The first job I got in Washington was with a guy named Charlie Cook. I went to Georgetown, so I was down there. I got a job with Charlie Cook, exactly, a political analyst down there. I honestly didn't know who he was. I walked in, he asked me who my congressperson was. No idea, so I aced that question right off the bat. He took me anyway, inexplicably. And basically, I always tell people that when it comes to politics with me, I have the zeal of the converted, because I wasn't into it. And so as I got into it, I saw this has so many of the similarities that I loved about sports. The statistics, the historical piece of it, the personalities, the fact that no two races, just like no two basketball games or baseball games, are the same. So many of the things that drew me to sports is what ultimately got me into politics. It's been kind of a neat time.
Yeah, and to work for the Washington Post, which many regard as the pinnacle of journalism, I know I was so excited when I got hired here, because longtime viewers will remember Channel 3 was once owned by the Washington Post company as well.
It's an amazing experience. Yeah. I always tell people on a daily basis, David Broder, legendary political columnist, walks by me, says hello to me, which is a very neat thing. Bob Woodward is occasionally in and out of the office. It's a really neat thing to work in a place that's made that much history.
All inspired by all the president's men back in the 1970s. Let's talk a little bit about what's been going on this year. Are you surprised that there is so much political news today after, President Obama won? Everyone thought he'd be this, this extremely popular president. He still is, but his approval ratings are falling, and you have all these incumbents in danger of losing next year, including Chris Dodd.
Yeah, Dennis, thankfully for my job, politics has been extremely interesting. We went from the 2008 election, which was historic in a lot of ways, from the fact that you had, obviously, the first African-American president elected. You also had somebody win 365 electoral votes, which you go back all the way to George H.W. Bush. We haven't seen a margin like that in a very long time. I think in retrospect, the opposition that's arisen isn't terribly surprising, in that, go back and look over the last 20 years in national politics. What you generally see is people like to balance their ticket. They're not in love with single-party control. They don't necessarily trust government, and so they want one party kind of watching the other party. I think that changed in 2006 and 2008 because of the distaste for George W. Bush, and I think that led many people to say, you know what, let's try anything else. I don't care if they control the state Senate, the state House, the governorship, the Senate, the presidency. Let's go with this other party. That pendulum, like it always does in politics, is starting to shift back.
Our big story this year, of course, is the early start to the Senate race. Senator Chris Dodd, back in early 2008 in January, he was a very popular senator, high approval ratings from a very blue state. Now he's in danger of losing to a Republican.
It is a remarkable arc politically for Chris Dodd. I mean, this is someone who, both in Connecticut but also in Washington, is seen as, and had long been seen as, a very powerful senator, close friends with Ted Kennedy, the late Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, sitting on very powerful committees. He'd been there since 1980. Someone who, if I had to go down the list of all 100 of them and pick in a vacuum who I think would be vulnerable, Chris Dodd would be in the 75 to 100. Yeah. He certainly wouldn't be in the 1 to 10, which is where he finds himself now. It's a number of things. The moving the family to Iowa during the quixotic presidential campaign of 2008 does not help. The countrywide story does not help. The cottage in Ireland does not help. Any of these things in a vacuum, he probably survives and is okay politically. Put together, the narrative looks like this is someone who's lost touch with Connecticut, and that is dangerous for any politician. Fill in, politician X has lost touch with state, fill in the blank. That's always a dangerous argument. And you see Senator Dodd's numbers are remarkably low. He had a little bit of a rise from the spring all the way through early fall. You saw a Quinnipiac poll come out in the fall that showed his numbers kind of seeping back. Lots of concerns in Washington about, can he win this race?
Nobody close to Chris Dodd will talk about these rumors that he may not run for re-election next year, maybe he'll retire or get an ambassadorship through President Obama or so forth. What do you think is going to be happening at the Dodd House over the Christmas holiday? Do you think there will be any discussion of this?
I've talked to people who are, I don't want to say close to him, but familiar with his thinking. Any time a politician has been in office as long as Senator Dodd has, there's a lot of people around him, so you never know who's particularly close to him. But I will say that some people close to him do say it is something he occasionally contemplates. He looks at his numbers and he says, this is going to be hard. But interestingly, 2 weeks ago is when the rumors really started to pick up again, at least in Washington. I talked to those same people. They said he's more convinced than ever that he can win. A Democratic polling from right before I left to come up here released a poll that said Chris Dodd can win, essentially showing him down a few points to Rob Simmons, the former congressman from my neck of the woods in eastern Connecticut, and tied with Linda McMahon. So can he win? Sure, any politician can win. Is it a good thing when a Democratic polling firm has to put out a polling memo that says the incumbent can win when the incumbent's been there for 20, almost 30 years? That's not a good sign. It shows the level of vulnerability that exists for him.
And if those polled are reminded of the negatives of the Republican candidates. And, I mean, I had to be surprised because, the Republicans no doubt are going to bring up Senator Dodd's negatives all next year in commercials and so forth.
You've hit it right on the head, Dennis. That's the thing. I think Senator Dodd's numbers did get better. If you look at where he was in the spring when he really hit a nadir, his numbers started to get better. He was involved in the credit card reform, popular. He's out with the president, doing some more things, showing his sway, his ability to deliver for the state. The problem is, there's no campaign really going on for the average person out there. My mom and dad, I think they're aware that Chris Dodd is up in 2010, but they're not watching day to day. Oh, Linda McMahon said this. Oh, Rob Simmons said that. They're not watching the day to day. When people focus on this, and that almost always happens in the last 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks of an election. It might be a little longer because Senator Dodd is a large presence in the state, but it won't be that long. When they focus on it, there's a lot Republicans can talk about, and reminding voters of those negative things. It's going to be hard for Chris Dodd to overcome.
I mean, there's some word that perhaps some speculation that the next poll out by Quinnipiac University will pit Richard Blumenthal against these Republicans. And if the numbers come out to show Chris Dodd losing to them, but Blumenthal winning big, do you think the Democrats will sit down and have hey, look at this, we have numbers now?
It's yes, I think they will. The question is, who does it and when do they do it? I think if it was someone other than Senator Dodd, someone who had not been the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, had not been in Washington as long as he had not done as much for the party as he has done, I think the plug might have been pulled before this. I think there is a desire from the White House, from the National Democratic Senatorial Committee in Washington, to give him as much time as is possible to save himself. The problem that Senator Dodd has is that, as you mentioned, the state attorney general, Richard Blumenthal, is extremely popular, the most popular politician in the state. He's been attorney general since 1990. Yeah. Since the day after he was elected, we've been talking about him running for the Senate. He's now said he would run against Senator Lieberman in 2012. I would guess he would jump at an open seat in 2010. So that specter is out there. That idea is out there that if Senator Dodd stepped away, Mr. Blumenthal stepped in, this would, as you mentioned before, this is a very blue state. This is a state that Democrats shouldn't have to worry about. They would like to not have to worry about it. So Senator Dodd has to counter that. He has to show he can win.
I want to get your thoughts on Joe Lieberman when we come back after this quick timeout. And don't forget, you can comment about today's program on my blog, The Hartfordite. Just go to WFSB.com. I'll also have a link to Chris's blog at The Washington Post. And you can talk about today's broadcast also on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Dennis House WFSB. We'll be right back.